against the regime. So I guess I wouldn't compare these two situations, the situation of Egypt and Libya, closely. I think the sociology and the history is quite different here.
So then, very quickly, finally, then, what would you advise the U.S. government to do right now?
I think what they're doing, be very clear in condemning the human rights abuses by the Gaddafi government and being willing to go back to economic sanctions should the international community have to do that to get the attention of Colonel Gaddafi and his family.
Nicholas Burns, well, let's get some analysis. Our senior political analyst, Marwan Bashara, joins us now. I think that's very representative of what we hear in the United States. One, frankly, there's absolutely no pressure on President Obama to do anything, really, domestically. Yeah. But secondly, the mantra is we are broadly focused on human rights, but there's no real specificity that then comes from that at all.
That's true. It's a mantra. I mean, for many, many years now, the successive U.S. administrations have been in bed with various Arab autocrats, disregarding completely the question of human rights for the so-called national interest, not realizing at the end of the day that national interest does or could coincide with human rights policy. Here in the question of Libya, of course, and as the former Deputy Secretary of State for Near East Affairs or something like that, has said the U.S. does have very little leverage today with the Libyans. But that doesn't come from a void. The question is, around the world, solution to these sorts of problems have been always regional. But the fact that the United States had basically emptied the region of any strategic leverage within it, any Arab incubation of those sorts of problems, the fact that it divided the region to moderates and radicals and terrorists and jihadists and so on and so forth, now left the region with lack of capacity to deal with any of its own solutions. So the Arab region is not capable of dealing with Bahrain, the Arab region is not capable of dealing with Lebanon, the Arab region is not capable of Palestine, as well as Libya.
Right, so but that doesn't really help then, because unfortunately also, because of previous supposed liberal interventions, there is very little trust for any U.S. action, perhaps, in the region either. So what can be done, do you think?
That's very true. As soon as people start speaking of NATO intervening in the Arab region, bearing in memory Iraq and Afghanistan, Pakistan, and bombings through drones in Yemen and so on and so forth, of course, is not exactly the best of memories. The use of NATO and the use of military intervention has been, for the last 2 decades, for the wrong reasons, as we've seen. And so, yes, it does shiver through the backbones of many. Unfortunately, the question now being posed about the possibility of no-fly zone over Libya and possibility of massacres and genocide in Libya, of course, is not exactly that of a choice between right and wrong. It's between two of worse scenarios, if you will.
But then some would suggest a no-fly zone is the worst of both worlds, because one, it gets the US and NATO involved in a situation once again in North Africa and sets a precedent for intervention which I think fewer would necessarily want to have. Secondly, a no-fly zone gives the UN Security Council the suggestion it's doing something concrete even as those massacres continue with American weaponry or whatever on the ground anyway.
That's true. We are living in an international system whereby there's very little capacity for outside forces to affect what goes on within the unit of the international system, which is the state. So what we have is the best case scenario, and by the way, we're a bit perhaps ahead of ourselves here on this question because the Security Council hasn't even agreed on this question. And why? I suspect the Russians and the Chinese are also worried about the fact that NATO might be the one that will carry the no-fly zone. Why not the Chinese and the Russians as well, for example?
But surely they wouldn't, I mean, the usual thinking would go, but again, it's that issue of the precedence of intervention in the internal affairs of a country, even though massacres might be taking place, and even though Russia and China may even, well, I don't know actually, but I mean, they might have some moral twang about what's going on.
If you remember, Secretary General Kofi Annan, throughout his second tenure, had tried quite enthusiastically to present the so-called right to protect. And right to protect came under the notions that that international community must be able to intervene in states after Rwanda, after Somalia, and of course for them after Serbia. The question of genocide should not be allowed to pass because it is within the sovereignty of a state, and hence there should be the possibility for international community to intervene.
Right,
but
what's
we
the
haven't
international
arrived
community?
at that.
Yeah, because what's the international community? The US, NATO.
And that's why the Russians
Against the
and the
developing
Chinese
world.
are skeptical.
Right.
The Russians and Chinese are very skeptical, and that's, I suspect, why today they haven't arrived to that no-fly zone. Besides, I mean, who's going to do it? The French, that have been basically in bed with most of North African autocrats, the Americans with bad record in the east of the Arab world. So I think there is a strategic problem, and who will actually go ahead and carry it? And what if it didn't work? What if they end up shooting down civilian aircraft, for example? We don't know. So it is a complex question. Unfortunately, the way the escalation is going on, Shihab, today within Libya, especially within Tripoli, of course, will require something completely different. And I'm not sure any one of those countries is ready, willing, or it will be accepted that they will send their soldiers to fight in the streets of Tripoli. That is basically the question.
Owen Bashara, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, about 50 Libyan protesters demonstrated on Tuesday in front of the White House. Many of them are international students, some concerned that the Libyan regime may put a stop to their scholarships if they speak out. That hasn't stopped them, though. We spoke to a medical student who drove to Washington from Atlanta, Georgia. Here's her view.
I drove all the night to come today to say, stop the bloodshed. Stop the bloodshed in Libya. Stop the massacre, please. They will cut my scholarship and maybe not allow me to go back to home. But I don't care about my scholarship. I will go back home, and I would like to die like my people die. I don't want it to stay in the life without my people.
What do we want? Gaddafi out! When? Now!
If I have a way to go there, I will do immediately, but they close everything. I call for my people, for my family is there. My family is Benghazi, my family is in Tripoli, my family is in Darna. People is dying everywhere in Libya, and just the world is keeping dead silent. Why? I drive from Atlanta and come here today morning to come and say to my people, I'm sorry, I'm late, but that's what I can do for you now.
Well, some Latin American nations have responded to what's been unfolding in Libya. Al Jazeera has learned that Peru has now suspended all diplomatic ties with Libya. The Chilean government released a statement saying it, quote, expresses its extreme concern for the evolution of the political situation and the use of force in Libya. Similarly, the Brazilian government, quote, urges the Libyan authorities to take measures so as to preserve the security and the free circulation of foreigners in the country. Brazil has billions of dollars invested in Libya, it's worth noting. And in a telephone call to Gaddafi, though, Nicaragua's president, Daniel Ortega, a longtime ally of Gaddafi, is the only regional leader to express his solidarity with Colonel Gaddafi. He says, quote, the Libyan leader is again waging a great battle, end quote, to defend the unity of his nation. Ortega adding, it's at difficult times that loyalty and resolve are put to the test. But Venezuela's President Hugo Chavez, who's also been a close ally of the Libyan leader, has yet to comment. Al Jazeera's Latin America editor Lucia Newman has more.
The relationship between Libya and Latin America is not economic, it is political. Libya, like many countries in Latin America, is a member of the non-aligned movement. And now we're seeing Peru taking the lead by breaking off diplomatic relations with Tripoli to